Oh. She's even sparkling a little bit. Is it giving Edward Cullen? Happy Halloween, my stinkies. If you couldn't tell, I was trying to go for kind of a vampire look today. Of course, I don't have the teeth or the blood or anything because it would make it too hard to speak. But this cape, like I would wear this every single day. In the beginning of my last video, I was like, do I use my spooky season powers for good or for evil? And I think it's pretty obvious. I've decided to use them to be sexy. Okay, enough of that, I'm sorry. Before we get into the topic of today's video, huge spoiler warning. We are getting into it and we are getting nasty with these movies. No stone unturned. So that's your spoiler warning for today. We're going to be talking about Halloween 2 from 1981 and Halloween Kills that was just released. All right. I don't know if this cape is going to behave. We're gonna do our best. Also, again, apologies for the lighting. I am in Poland right now. I am not at home. I don't have my whole lighting kit, okay, etc., etc. Diving into the topic of today's video. Halloween 2 versus Halloween Kills. So why am I doing this comparison? You might be asking. A lot of you guys actually wanted me to compare Halloween 2 to Rob Zombie's Halloween 2. And I just don't know. Maybe next year, next Halloween season, I will be ready to put myself through that again and watch that movie again. But it's too soon for me to do that right now. I think in 50 years, it will still be too soon. So I'm gonna go ahead and just push that off for another year. It's just because Rob Zombie really swung for the fucking walls with that one, and like not in a good way. At least not in a relevant way, not in a way that I feel like I could have an enlightened discussion about it. So we're gonna skip that for now. We're comparing two good movies today instead. Also because there are a shocking amount of similarities between these two sequels, and there are a few ways where I actually feel like Halloween Kills was expanding upon Halloween 2 intentionally. I know that Halloween 2 is technically not considered canon anymore, but you will understand if you stick around for the video. So the structure of today's video shall be as such. We're gonna break down all of the behind the scenes action of both of the movies. Then we'll talk about all of the plot differences, and I'll get more into the ways where I feel like Halloween Kills is kind of an extension of Halloween 2. Then we'll do a brief character comparison. There's not too much to compare there, but of course we'll talk about Laurie and Michael again and a couple of the side characters. Then we'll get into the overall themes of each of the movies, and finally I will end it with a general comparison of the two, and we'll try to decide which movie is the superior film. So let's kick it off, shall we? So Halloween from 1981, as you hopefully know, was directed by Rick Rosenthal. You might know him from a little movie called Halloween Resurrection. Yeah, I always forget that it's the same guy that did both of these movies, but we're definitely not here to talk about Halloween Resurrection today. Oh no. Today we're gonna get into all of the behind the scenes stuff from the making of Halloween 2. I actually found this documentary called The Nightmare Isn't Over, The Making of Halloween 2. So that's where most of my info is coming from today. Also, I did do a Halloween series last year on my channel, so I have reviewed Halloween 2 before. Some of these fun facts might have been in that video. I don't know. I've mentioned recently that I don't really like to watch my old videos. I get bothered by how bad my editing was back then, and like I just probably said some stuff that I wouldn't agree with now. You get the point. So diving straight in, executive producer Irwin Yablans is responsible for this sequel, not John Carpenter. Tommy Lee Wallace, who was a production designer and co-editor of the original Halloween, recalls when the idea for this sequel was floated, and he says that nobody was very excited about it because they all really felt like they had done the thing with the original Halloween. Also, John Carpenter didn't really have an interest in doing the sequel at first. In fact, he wanted to do The Fog instead, and so they made a deal where he did do The Fog first. However, there was actually a legal battle that ensued before The Fog or Halloween 2 was made. The battle was between Yablans and Avco Embassy / John Carpenter. Avco Embassy was actually a rival production company, and Carpenter had agreed to do The Fog with them. So then Yablans sued them because I'm sure it's more complicated than this, but his explanation was more or less like, well, I wanted to make the movies with Carpenter. So then they settled on Avco Embassy producing The Fog, and then Yablans got to produce Halloween 2 with Carpenter. Although Yablans and Tommy Lee Wallace are both on record in this documentary saying that when they received the script, they didn't like it because it was everything that the original Halloween was not. It was very predictable. And they mentioned how much of the influence had come from Friday the 13th and other Halloween copycats. And because of that, that, Tommy Lee Wallace actually withdrew from the project entirely. I believe he was slated to direct too, so that was kind of a big deal. And then of course Rick Rosenthal took on the project. There was also a small feature about Donald Pleasance in this documentary, and everyone pretty much just raved about how amazing it was to work with him. Apparently when he showed up to set, he was never there to just hang around. He would be in his dressing room reading lines, and when he would show up to the actual set, he would know not only his own lines, but everybody else's, so Donald did not come to play. Yablans even credits him as the reason why all of the sequels were able to happen. However, they had another sort of fresh face in this movie. Lance guest stars as sort of the romantic lead in this movie, and the other actors of the film sort of reference him as the star of this movie. However, they actually had a tough time with him because his training was mostly in theater. He actually had a tough time staying on his mark because of his theater training. A lot of his actions and stuff were very large. So because of that, he would end up stepping out of frame, and so Rosenthal was always like, dude, get back in the frame. However, there is another much crazier story about one of the actresses in this movie. Anna Alicia plays Janet in this movie, who is the nurse that gets the needle in the eye. She actually got pretty severely injured during that death scene. Somebody forgot to move the desk in that set, so when she fell, she accidentally hit the corner of her eye, and she ended up having to get between 9 and 11 stitches, she said. And not only that, after it happened, she was yelling at Rosenthal, use it, use the take, because she was like, it's real blood and gore, better not to waste it, like I injured myself, just use the take. But unfortunately, it wasn't usable. And apparently, a lot of the movie ended up not being usable because when John Carpenter went in and saw the first edit, he was not a fan of it. Well, John and Deborah, they're very much a team. I always speak about it as if it's like just John Carpenter's Halloween, but especially with the first two movies, they are John and Deborah Hill's Halloweens. Anyways, they ended up bringing in the editor of the TV version of Halloween to like provide a fresh set of eyes on the project. So the editor, Skip Schlunik and John Carpenter ended up cutting down about 14 minutes from the film, and then John wrote new scenes for reshoots. So they did some reshoots, and it just ultimately took quite a lot of effort to make it a watchable movie in John Carpenter and Deborah Hill's eyes. Alan Howarth was actually mainly responsible for making the score of this movie, which is a fan favorite. He wanted to give it a more gothic and darker texture, so he took the original from a 16-track score and turned it into a 24-track score, and he layered himself playing on top of it. So that's how he brought about the new sound with that organ and the more gothic nature of it, which I'm definitely a fan of. I really love the organ in the score, but I don't really love the kind of like plinkier, a little bit more high-pitched version of the piano, but the like love that. Anyway, to sort of wrap it up with the behind-the-scenes info about Halloween 2, this movie actually took about 20 years to gain the kind of cult following that it has now. Or it's not that it necessarily took 20 years for the cult following to grow or anything. It kind of just took like the birth of the internet and all these Halloween 2 fans to find each other to kind of prove that the cult following existed. I hope that makes sense. Like, I guess there were just a lot of people out there that didn't realize how many other people loved Halloween 2, but it has a massive fan base. So moving on from that popular sequel to the brand new Halloween Kills, they finally released some more behind the scenes footage and stuff like that, so we're gonna get into some of that today. Danny McBride said that the main focus of Halloween Kills was to broaden the scope of Halloween, hence why they brought in so many of the old characters. Jamie Lee Curtis thinks that the role of Tommy Doyle, played by Anthony Michael Hall, was actually the most difficult of these roles to fulfill because he was charged with so much. He was responsible for building the momentum of basically the entire movie, and I think I would actually agree with that. I don't know if I would call him the main character, but I don't know, he was certainly one of the main characters. Anyways, speaking of character, David Gordon Green then said that he wanted to create a movie that could cater to every generation, every age. So Laurie, Karen, and Allison were the representation for that. Judy Greer also says that he's very receptive when it comes to bringing him notes about their characters. I actually mentioned this in my last video. Green fosters a very collaborative, creative environment on set. He also mentioned something that I didn't know and wouldn't really assume, but he said that he views Laurie more or less as the centerpiece of this franchise. So Jamie Lee Curtis is always in mind when they're writing, and he likes to keep her close and likes to get her input. So she gets early drafts of the script. He likes to ask her, like, how does this feel? Can we work with this? And they will run through scenes together. And I think that's cool because along with John Carpenter, she is credited as an executive producer of these movies. movies. And she's actually very involved, which I tend to prefer because I've mentioned on this channel how the title of producer, it can mean like a lot of different things. Sometimes people's titles in the credits can be a little bit misleading. Like someone will be called an executive producer, but it really just means that they funded the project and then they'll show up to set for like 2 days just to kind of see how their money is being spent. But not only is Curtis acting, she's actually also very involved in development, which it's just kind of nice to know in my opinion. I think it's also just nice that she's given as much credit as she deserves, frankly. But this movie also served as a huge reunion, not only for the core cast like Jamie Lee Curtis and such, but for like so many people that worked on the original film. And it was so sweet because Kyle Richards, who played Lindsay in the original, and Jamie Lee Curtis had this really cute kind of reunion moment where they recreated Jamie picking up Lindsay like she would have back in the day. But back to the film itself, Greene really wanted to live up to the title that they gave the movie, Halloween Kills, but he did not realize or consider just how technically difficult this movie was going to be to film. For example, the behind the scenes of the fire scene looked particularly insane. Also, another example is that when they were filming Lindsay and Michael's chase scene and she was kind of hiding next to that embankment, they had to be on the lookout for not only snakes, but alligators as well. So some of her fear during that scene is actually real.
What do they do if I get snatched up by an alligator?
So Kyle Richards is a trooper. So now we are going to get into sort of the plot breakdown of both of these movies and compare and contrast them. Following the events of Halloween, Michael Myers, an escaped convict, continues his murdering spree, still being hunted by Dr. Loomis. Over the course of the night, Laurie is hospitalized, and it's revealed that the reason why Michael Myers is hunting her down is because Laurie Strode is actually Michael's sister. In Halloween Kills, in a similar scenario, we follow the destruction of Michael Myers after the events of Halloween. In the same night, a mob is organized to track him down. Laurie is hospitalized and learns that Michael never had an obsession with her, but killed merely for the sake of killing. So we have some major similarities and some major differences that I'll get into, but I just have to point out something real quick. It's so painful to me how obviously different the house is that he falls out of and how different Michael and his mask are. Like, it physically pains me how bad the continuity is between the original Halloween and Halloween 2, but getting on to the plots, fire is a pretty big element in both of these movies. Halloween 2 ends in fire with Michael being burned to death, whereas in Halloween Kills, when we introduce Michael, we begin in fire. So he actually emerges from fire in both movies. It's just that in Halloween 2, he collapses and burns up like a little potato chip. Potato chip? I'm going with it. Both movies take place during the same night after their respective Halloweens, and both largely take place in hospitals. Whereas 2 is much more moody, they utilize the creepy atmosphere of the hospital. There's almost nobody there the entire night. The opposite is true in Kills, where you have giant mobs overtaking the well-lit halls. So it's stylistically kind of flipped on its head. You have 2 entirely different moods created in either movie. Also, Kills is a lot more dense. I feel like with 2, I'm constantly thinking like, can we hurry it along? Why are we just hanging out in the nurse's lounge right now? Whereas I feel with Kills, you start in the middle of the mayhem and then it just keeps getting crazier from there. I never really feel a dull moment with Kills, even more, dialogue heavy scenes where there's less action. I feel like it's always progressing the plot. Something of note is always happening. It's a little bit more thick, if you catch my drift. The commentary is especially potent, which I'll only touch on briefly because of course we'll get there during the theme portion of the video. The mob mentality is very overtly explored in Kills, and I think that this actually came about because of Halloween 2. In Halloween 2, a small mob of the town of Haddonfield actually heads over to Michael Myers' house, but it's very brief and it's not revisited again, so my theory is that Greene and McBride said, well, what if that mob had actually done something that night? And thus, the plot of Kills was born. Allegedly, that's just my theory. So that's what I mean when I say there are actually a lot of similarities between these two movies and how much inspiration I think actually came from Halloween 2 for Kills. I personally view Kills as a more optimized version of Halloween 2, if you will. Also, Halloween 2 was meant to be the end of it. Of course, the infamous Season of the Witch came the year after that. So plot-wise, Halloween 2 is much less open-ended. Of course, I mean, technically Michael does die. We never get the full confirmation, but that close-up of the burning mask is pretty damning, I would say. Kills is is of course much more open-ended with Michael killing Karen in the end, but that's because it's a trilogy, but you know this. We'll actually be covering some more of the plot stuff during the character comparison, so let's just get to that right now. Starting with some of the side characters, I actually want to discuss briefly some of the love interests in these movies. In Halloween 2, we had Jimmy, the EMT, who was very into Laurie. You know, the hunky boy who ultimately sort of takes himself out of the game. There was actually an alternate ending with him where he sits up in the back of the ambulance, revealing that he's alive, he just has a head injury. In Kills, we have Cameron, who was the love interest actually introduced in Halloween 2018. Although he goes through a really douchey character arc in that movie that was pretty much reversed in Kills. Back then, I didn't really see the point of them doing that in Halloween 2018 because I was like, okay, thanks, I hate him, and then he didn't die. But now having seen Kills and seeing how episodic this trilogy is meant to be, I'm kind of like, oh. Especially because it's been revealed that his father is Lonnie Elam and his family has been pretty much just as traumatized as the Strodes. So his drinking problem and him being really horrible to Allison at the dance has a bit more context now. Maybe a bit of a reach, but in both Halloween 2 and Halloween Kills, we have a lovable idiot to root for. Okay, maybe idiot is a bit harsh, but I feel like if I had to choose a trope for both of these people to fall into, the lovable idiot feels appropriate. Sheriff Brackett actually appears in both of these movies as well, and so does Annie Brackett. And as I mentioned before, the scene of Annie's body being revealed is actually featured in Kills. Brackett is not really important in either movie, but he's there, so that's cool. Now we're getting to a point of the video where I'm gonna ask you to walk with me here. I want to compare Tommy Doyle to Dr. Loomis. In Halloween 2, Dr. Loomis is running around and he's trying to track down Michael, and this is pretty much exactly what Tommy Doyle is doing in Kills. Both of them even join forces with Marion Crane, who, by the way, is in both of these movies too.
So real quick, if you're new here, my brain likes to change people's names and then not tell me, so then the wrong name often slips out. Marion Crane is actually from Psycho. She's like the lead character in Psycho, so that just kind of slipped out. Her name is actually Marion Chambers. Also, this is perhaps the cutest thing I have ever seen, but Jamie Lee Curtis dressed up as Marion Crane, well, technically like as her mom, for the premiere of Halloween Kills. I didn't even know that before things got switched around in my brain. How crazy is that?
Tommy is just sort of a more emotionally heightened and less professional version of Dr. Loomis. You know, they're essentially filling the same role in either movie. So I think it's a fair comparison to make Tommy Doyle almost becomes the new Dr. Loomis in this movie. Somebody pointed out in my last video that in Halloween 2018, Laurie is actually the new Dr. Loomis and Allison is kind of the new Laurie. I thought that was really interesting, and I think it's also interesting how in every movie we have some sort of incarnation of Dr. Loomis. And it makes me wonder, like, would a Halloween movie work if there wasn't some sort of Dr. Loomis to try to be tracking Michael down and being obsessed with him? I don't know. And of course, we have to talk about the girl Laurie. Excuse me, the Queen. Laurie actually goes through very similar moments in both movies. In both films, she is taken to the hospital and she's pretty much out of commission and just, you know, laying in bed for most of the movies. In both cases, she is a bit neurotic. In Halloween 2, she refuses to be put to sleep. In Kills, we've already discussed this at length, but she is a very mentally ill person. She even jabs herself in the butt with some drugs when she hears that Michael is at the hospital. That was one of those movie theater moments that makes you go, oh, don't know about you, but I do not do well with needles. Kind of ironic that a girl that cries when she gets her blood drawn decided to dress up as a vampire. Sorry, tangents. Laurie was much more involved though with the showdown in Halloween 2 because of the big reveal that Michael is her brother. Whereas in Kills, she actually doesn't share a single scene with Michael. And I'm sure you're wondering why I didn't discuss the sibling plotline during the plot portion of the video, but it's because we have a lot more to get into with that during the theme portion of the video. Anyways, her lacking any scenes with Michael in Kills, I think best exemplifies that Michael does not give a shit about Laurie. It was random bad luck that she was chosen on that Halloween night all those years ago. Also, because Laurie is not the focal point of Kills, it's harder to make a much deeper comparison than that. And we've already done so many different Laurie comparisons on this channel, I think that it's time that we just move on to the boy. So Michael Myers, in Halloween 2, he is played by a man named Dick Warlock, who was actually also the stunt coordinator for the entire movie. Not a bad Michael, but also not really one of my favorites. Warlock also seems seems to be a bit salty about the fact that Deborah Hill says that he never quite got the right Michael walk down. When he was interviewed, he mentioned that she was on set every single day, and neither she or Rick Rosenthal ever made a comment about his walk, so he just assumed that they liked what he was doing. Although I'm trying to think of how I would try to coach somebody to get the Michael walk down right, and I don't know. Yeah, I mean, he's got a nice stiff walk, but it doesn't seem quite right. Yeah, it's a good stiff walk, but could you give it more of like a ghosty vibe? You see what I mean? Whereas we also just recently talked at length about the man, James Jude Courtney. Watch my comparison of the original to Halloween 2018 if you haven't seen that yet. I spoke a lot about Courtney and I compared him to Nick Castle, so if you want to hear all of that, that'll be linked down below. I think he is the best Michael. I think he has beyond perfect movements, and Halloween Kills featured my favorite Michael by far of the entire franchise. So comparing him to Dick Warlock, like, you already know. And I think more importantly, the biggest difference with Michael is what drives him, like his motivation in either of these movies. So it's now time to get into the theme portion of this video. So in Halloween 2, Michael is driven by his obsession with Laurie, his obsession with his sister. In terms of thematics, is that trying to say anything? Like, suburban America so bogged down by their white picket fences and the projection of perfection that the families turn on one another. No, sorry, but no. This movie was made in an attempt to cash in on the success of the original. It was not a movie that Carpenter even wanted to write. The intention was to outdo a lot of the Halloween copycats that had been pumped out in the years since the original's release. So thematically, what is this movie trying to do? My guess is not much. So Halloween Kills was like, that's cute, but are you ready for what I have to say? Excuse me.
One of the things that is deeply explored in this movie is, was it really Laurie Strode, or was it something else? That there may be something deeper in him.
Aha, there is something much deeper about Michael in Halloween Kills. Much farther than just having an obsession with Laurie, it is far darker. I find it to be much more intense. We don't quite know what the intention is. I think I have a pretty good guess, but we won't know for sure until Halloween Ends comes out. I broke this down to the bone in my Halloween Kills review recently, but regardless, I'll get into it a little bit here. I believe that Michael represents society's collective issues that we are unable or just simply unwilling to solve. Issues that are typically dealt with via extreme violence. So he's sort of the representation of collective fear and a broken system. On the Fandango channel, actually, Jamie and Judy broke down their scene in the hospital when Laurie finds out that Michael is still alive. And Judy was kind of taken aback by the dialogue that her character has when Karen says, "Mom, there is a system in place for these things."
There's a system.
Well, the system failed.
And because this movie was filmed in 2019, before all of the insane events that happened in 2020, she thinks that this movie became a lot more meta than it was ever meant to be.
So David Gordon Greene, I think he might be a witch. He's like a weird witch who can see the future.
I might have to agree with Judy Greer on that. David Gordon Greene looking a little bit sus. I'm just kidding. I also think that Jamie Lee Curtis had some more interesting insight to the kind of mob mentality commentary.
As he transcends and kills harder and more thoughtlessly, so do the people he is affecting.
I think that that is also related to the commentary of the whole collective fear allegory they were going for. And before this movie even came out, Jamie Lee Curtis predicted that this movie would be very agitating for people. Andy Matichak, who plays Allison, also said that this movie starts at 100% and it ends at 500%, and I think both of them were definitely right. So I'm pretty certain in my assumption of what Michael represents, but it's either that or he's like the devil himself. Because given how much power he gets from killing people and feeding on their fear, that's like god levels of evil. But I just don't really see that being the case because I feel like there is something a little bit deeper to it. Jamie Lee Curtis also compares the ending of the movie to sort of the overall theme of violence in the movie. Because Karen dies and it's so weird and unexpected, it's just completely out of the blue, and then like bam, it's over. And Curtis was saying that that's basically just how violence goes. Like it happens and then the shock settles in. in. There's no poetic closure. It's just like, okay, that happened and now I have to process it. Maybe it's kind of exemplifying how no good comes from violence. It's just a way that people typically react. Anyways, also, Karen's death was shot in a very weird style compared to the rest of the movie. Actually, so were the deaths of everyone in Tommy's mob though, and I'm wondering if this was meant to be in Michael's perspective. Her death scene reminded me of Judith's death, the very first death of the entire Halloween franchise, just in the way that it was shot. And at first I thought that it was just because she died in the exact same place that Judith Meyer died all those years ago. Watching it again though, I'm like, is this what Michael sees? There's a lot of emphasis on her face and her emotions. We also get a lot of close-ups of her mouth, which is why I'm led to believe that we're meant to be focusing kind of on Michael feeding on the fear, and maybe now we're in his perspective of how he eats? Or it was just an homage, who knows? But now, babes, it is time for an overall comparison. In terms of both of these movies being sequels to their respective Halloweens, how do they compare? So Halloween 2, it's a fun movie, I like it. I definitely don't revisit it as much though as the original because I think seeing it once was kind of enough for me. Upon a rewatch, I do get a little bit bored. I completely understand the cult following that it does have though. In fact, I think it's more of just like a mainstream, well-liked movie now. However, all that to say, I don't think that it's a great sequel. It's a good sequel, but just it's not a great one. It's lacking in a lot of the slow building suspense of the original, and just nothing about Halloween 2 is original, which you can't really help that from happening because when it's a sequel, it's kind of in the name. That being said though, when we're talking about Halloween Kills, I feel like it was something completely fresh, not only to Halloween 2018, but like to the entire franchise. Halloween 2 fell into the trap of trying to do what was popular at the time, and I don't think that's Carpenter's fault or Deborah Hill's fault or anyone's fault that was working on the project. It just unfortunately makes that movie a little bit more boring to me. Kills had me on the edge of my seat the entire time. I still think it's a blast on a rewatch. It keeps me really engaged, and I think it's the best Michael. So we do have an easy winner in my eyes today. I think that Halloween Kills takes the cake on this one. Yes, indeed. But for the rest of my audience, I don't know how you guys are gonna feel. Like, I genuinely have no idea. So please let me know how you feel down below. I'm really curious, and I'm very open to having this conversation because there are a lot of fans of each of these movies for very different reasons. So don't be shy, come on down. I also hope that you liked that I tried to put in a little bit more effort today with my little costume, even if you can't really see it. And please let me know what you're gonna be for Halloween. I really wanna know. Maybe it will give me some ideas for next year, and also I'm trying to live through you guys right now. I really wanted to go all out for my costume, as I always want to, but I'm in Poland this year, and so I couldn't really fit a bunch of costume stuff into my suitcase. Also because it's cold here. I don't know if you know this, but most of the world experiences a very cold season at some point of the year. I am from Los Angeles, California, and my body simply just rejects this kind of weather. So I had to cram a lot of very warm clothing, a lot of puffy jackets into my suitcase, which was very difficult without also having to try to cram in a costume. But alas, I shall live vicariously through you. So thank you in advance for letting me know what your Halloween costume is, and maybe I'll see a picture of it on Instagram or something. But to end this lovely video, I want to thank my patrons. I love you guys. If you guys also want to support me, that'll be linked down below. Stay hydrated tonight, stay safe, call an Uber if you need to, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye!